Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. If you're watching us from India, tomato prices are hurting you. If you're watching us from Indonesia, you know coffee prices are shooting up. In fact, wherever you are in the world, chocolate, rice and wheat have become more expensive. Do you know that all these stories are linked? They're all linked to one story. The story that most of you don't like to watch. I'm not saying this, our data is. Climate change is hurting all of us, yet most of us remain indifferent to it. In the latest update, Nepal has sent an SOS to India. They want rice and sugar. China, despite all its problems, domestic problems meanwhile, is busy needling its neighbors, this time with an air base on a disputed island. In other news, is the stock market crashing? Some big players have made very big bets on a crash. Superpower America is going after its women. Access to their most widely used abortion pill has been further restricted. The Taliban says political parties are against the Sharia law, so they're banning them. Singapore is in the news for a Hollywood-style police raid, and the world is tuning out of cable television. Streaming is now the name of the game. We'll show you the numbers, the headlines first. US approves Israel's defense deal with Germany. This clears the way for the sale of the Arrow 3 hypersonic missile defense system to Berlin. It's Israel's biggest military deal, worth over $3 billion. The Arrow 3 system is jointly developed and produced by Israel and the US. Libyan militia leader freed after deadly clashes. Mahmoud Hamza was being held by a rival faction. His detention led to gun battles on the streets of the capital. More than 50 people were killed in the violence in Tripoli this week. Iran's foreign minister is in Riyadh. This is his first official Saudi trip since a landmark deal in March. The longtime rivals agreed to restore diplomatic relations and reopen embassies earlier this year. In June, Prince Farhan became the first Saudi foreign minister to travel to Iran since 2006. Sweden raises its terror alert amid Quran burnings. Its intelligence agency heightens the level of threat to 4 on a scale of 5, saying Quran burnings have made Sweden, quote-unquote, a prioritized target. Stockholm has angered many Muslim countries for allowing the desecration of their holy book. And Japanese superbiker racer Haruki Noguchi dies from his injuries. The 22-year-old was injured in a crash during a race in Indonesia on Sunday. The rising superbike star made his debut in 2017. Noguchi was one of the favorites to win the championship this year. A typhoon in Japan, landslides in India, wildfires in the US and storms in Germany. 4 different natural disasters in 4 different corners of the planet. They make for dramatic pictures, but when we show them in the news, they're met with indifference. Show a climate story and most viewers will move on. Do you wonder why? Well, we do all the time. Perhaps people think it's a distant tragedy. It's happening to someone else, far away. It has no clear villain. So why should you care about a climate disaster that is not affecting you directly? I'll tell you why. You should care because it is affecting you in more ways than you can imagine. It is affecting the food on your plate and the money in your pocket, the sugar in your sweets and the tomato in your burgers, even the coffee in your cup. Climate change, extreme weather is impacting all of this and more. India's Prime Minister Modi said as much during his Independence Day speech this week.
आज दुनिया महंगाई के संकट से जूझ रही है। पूरी दुनिया की अर्थव्यवस्था को महंगाई ने दबोच के रखा है। हम भी दुनिया से जिन सामान की जरूरत होती है लाते हैं, तो हमें सामान तो इंपोर्ट करते हैं। हमारा दुर्भाग्य है कि हमें महंगाई भी इंपोर्ट करनी पड़ती है। मुझे तो मेरे देशवासियों को महंगाई की बोझ कम से कम हो, इस दिशा में और भी कदम उठाने हैं और हम उस कदम को उठा के रहेंगे। मेरा प्रयास निरंतर जारी रहेगा।
India's neighbors are struggling too. New Delhi has received a request, an SOS call from Nepal. They want food grains from India. The request was made last week. Nepal wants 1 million tons of paddy and 100,000 of rice. Also 50,000 tons of sugar. There is no immediate shortage, we are told, but there are fears that supplies could run out. So Kathmandu wants to beef up its stocks. It's a precautionary measure. Nepal will soon enter the festive season. So there is a chance that traders will begin hoarding supplies. Now, Nepal heavily depends on India for food grains. From 2021 to 2022, it imported 1.4 million tons of rice from India. 1.4 million. 1.38 million tons of non-basmati rice and 19,000 tons of basmati rice. This was the biggest import on record. But it may not be possible to repeat now because India has banned the export of non-basmati rice. That's what Nepal consumes in larger numbers. So now they've made a special request that they be exempted from this ban. In return, they have an offer for India. And this is what Nepal is offering, tomatoes. If you live in this country, you know tomatoes are a major pain point. Prices have shot through the roof. We've been telling you about this too. By the end of July, tomato prices had soared by almost 300%. What is driving this spike? A shortage in supplies. And what is causing the shortage? Climate disasters. They have ruined the crop this year, so India had to resort to imports from Nepal. Reports say last Monday, Kathmandu dispatched some 30 tons of tomatoes to India. But that has not really eased the shortages. Retail outlets are dropping tomatoes from their menu. The latest to join the list is Burger King. Even tomatoes need a vacation, they say. So they're dropping them from the dishes. Burger King is the third major chain to do this. Earlier, McDonald's and Subway took the same call in India. And such stories are not limited to India. Extreme weather is taking more victims around the world. Indonesia, for instance, is suffering from excessive rain. This has hurt their coffee output. It has shrunk. As a result, prices have shot up. Halfway through 2023, coffee prices went up by 40%, 40% hike. Same with cocoa in Africa. Supplies have been dipping. Ghana is the world's second largest producer of cocoa. Yesterday it said it will export less cocoa. In June, prices touched their highest levels in 46 years. Cocoa prices, the highest in 46 years. Now with Ghana cutting supplies, the prices will rise only rise further. So your chocolates will become more expensive. Then we head to China. It suffered devastating floods this year. This hit their corn and rice supplies. The extent of the damage is not yet clear, but earlier this month, China raised the flood alert level for 3 provinces, Inner Mongolia, Jilin, and Heilongjiang. Now, these 3 provinces account for 23% of China's rice output. What happens if Beijing does not get enough rice? It will turn to the global markets. It will buy extra supplies from the rest of the world. And China has the money to do so, but poorer countries will suffer because there's only so much rice to go around. Also, food exporters are already under strain. They may not be in a position to take the extra orders. They're dealing with shortages. They're struggling to meet the current demand. You can blame climate change for all of this. Also, conflict, specifically the war in Ukraine. Let me show you some pictures from yesterday. This is another Ukrainian port that's been hit. It damaged the grain silos. Last week, some cargo ships were under fire. Ukraine was a major supplier of food grains. Despite the war, it continued to supply thanks to a grain deal, a deal that was brokered by the United Nations last year. But last month, Moscow pulled out of the deal, and now it has warned that it will not allow grain supplies to leave Ukraine, which means more shortages for the world. Despite these threats, Ukraine is said to have managed to ship some grains today. It might cool the global markets for a bit, but between climate disasters and this war, the world is set to suffer for the foreseeable future. Now, if Asia were an apartment complex, China would be that one neighbor who doesn't get along with anyone, the one with a reputation for misbehavior, the one known to cause tension and discord, the one who does not respect boundaries. Our viewers in India know this. China remains hostile at the border with India. Recently, military leaders from both sides met. They vowed to quote-unquote maintain peace. But the PLA made no commitment to disengage, so the pledge is just hollow words. China's belligerence is on display in Southeast Asia too. They're threatening their neighbors. Tonight, we'll tell you about their latest move. China is building an airstrip on a disputed island, an island claimed by both Vietnam and Taiwan. We have satellite pictures of the facility. It is clearly meant for military use. This is what it looks like. It is located on an island called Triton. This is in the South China Sea. Triton is part of the Paracel group of islands. It is very close to Taiwan and Vietnam. They stake a claim over it. But since the 1970s, China has controlled Triton. And now they're militarizing it. The construction began just a few weeks back. Earlier, there was no activity on Triton. Look at this picture. Most of the island looks uninhabited. Now look at the picture from August 2023, this month. Can you spot the difference? There is a long runway and some structures have also come up. Let's look a bit more closely. The runway is the most prominent structure. It is 600 meters or 2,000 feet long. That's large enough to accommodate some aircraft and drones. But that's not large enough for fighter jets or bombers. What else is on the island? A radar dome, a helipad, a cement plant and a dock. Construction activity picked up recently. You can see containers and construction equipment in these pictures, but these are still early days. China had built some harbors and a helipad earlier. What they're doing now is basically expanding the infrastructure. And by the time they're done, this island will become a new security nightmare, especially for China's neighbors. Beijing refuses to share any details about what it's doing. They have a standard response. This expansion is for navigation safety. But it's hard to buy the argument. Do you need military-grade facilities for navigation safety? Make no mistake, this is about the South China Sea. The Triton Island is part of the same dispute. China claims ownership of this island. In fact, it claims ownership of almost all of South China Sea. But 5 other players have competing claims. Vietnam, the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia and Brunei, they too stake claim, sometimes on the same piece of land in the South China Sea. For instance, the Triton Island. China maintains de facto control of Triton, but Vietnam says the island belongs to them. And Taiwan says the same. And here's something else you should know. Triton is one of the major islands in the South China Sea. It was in the news before. In 2018, the US sent a naval ship here. It conducted what it called a freedom of navigation operation. Basically, the American ship sailed close to the island, and the Americans regularly conduct such missions. It's their way of reminding Beijing that this is a disputed region and that China has no right to dictate the rules. So Washington basically backs China's neighbors in this dispute. It's a complex issue, also a major flashpoint in the region. And with its provocative actions, China is fanning the flames. Since last month, tensions have been high. Beijing has been pushing the limits. It began with this statement.
China's sovereignty and rights in the South China Sea have been formed through long-term historical practice with sufficient historical and legal basis and are not affected by legal arbitration under any circumstances.
What was that about? A 2016 arbitration ruling, a ruling that declared that China's claims on the South China Sea were baseless. Of course, Beijing never accepted the ruling. In July, it said the US and its allies are engaging in pressure tactics. They're forcing China to accept the ruling. In the same month, China threatened the Philippines. You may remember this too. That's a Chinese Coast Guard ship. It fired a water cannon on a Philippine vessel. China said this was supposed to be a warning. It warned the Philippines to stay away from the waters, but Manila did not budge. It refused to end its patrols.
It is our prayer that there will be no more water cannon incident. There will be less aggressive reception, to receive a less aggressive reception from the other side, especially because of the international attention that this incident generated.
In response, China is doubling down on its claims. It is militarizing more islands and threatening other neighbors. These actions will only raise tensions. So global politics is uncertain. Nothing new there. But what about the global economy? you can check its health by looking at a number of factors, like the stock markets, or GDP projections, or consumer spending. For now, let's look at the markets. In the US, Standard & Poor's is up 8% in the last 6 months. NASDAQ is up 14%, and Dow Jones around 3%. Now, these are solid numbers. But are we missing something here? Maybe a looming market crash. According to some investors, we are. Meet Michael Burry. You may know him as that guy from The Big Short. In 2008, he predicted the stock market crash. He made around $100 million in personal profits, plus $700 million for his investors. So he knows the market. And now he has placed another bet. It's worth around $1.6 billion. Once again, it's against the tide. Michael Burry is betting on a stock market crash. He placed the order in the last quarter. It makes up around 93% of his entire portfolio. So obviously he's confident about it, and he's not alone. Warren Buffett is doing the same thing. He's among the biggest investors in the world. His company sold shares worth $8 billion in the last quarter. Is that a lot for him? Well, not really. But once again, the timing is important. American stocks are supposed to be on the rebound. Inflation is cooling down, so the economy should be shooting up. But these ace investors do not think so. They're predicting a crash. Have they spotted something that we haven't? Well, the US is not really out of the woods yet. A couple of factors can still drag them down. Number one, of course, is China. Every single indicator from Beijing looks bad. Consumer spending, factory output, exports, fixed asset investments, all of it is in the negative. China's numbers look very bad. And this could have spillover effects on the US. Their Treasury Chief, Janet Yellen, admitted this, but she says Asian economies will be more affected. Factor number two is banks, American banks. A number of regional US banks have already collapsed, like First Republic and Silicon Valley. But the crisis is not over. Ratings agency Moody's has already downgraded 10 American banks. Another agency, Fitch, is warning of the same. They say dozens of US banks could be downgraded. We're talking about the big ones here, like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citibank. If they are downgraded, the impact will be huge. In fact, we're already seeing some downward movement. JP Morgan shares are down 2.7% in the last 5 days. Citibank is down 4%, and Bank of America around 5.6%. It tells you these credit ratings matter. Investors look at these ratings before putting their money in. Higher the rating, safer the investment, which is why a downgrade is bad news. But does it mean the markets will crash? I'm afraid it's not so simple. The US economy is going through a pretty weird phase. There's no other way to put it, really. Since March last year, the Federal Reserve has been hiking interest rates. They've done it 10 times. The lending rate is 5% higher than it was last year, and that's a lot, 5%. Ideally, this should have pulled the economy down. More unemployment, smaller GDP, less consumer spending. But the opposite is happening. Experts are predicting America's GDP to grow by 5.8% in this quarter. That's twice what it was last month. Unemployment has dipped to 3.5%. The US economy added 180,000 jobs in the last quarter. Spending is also up. Retail sales increased 0.7% last month. At the same time, inflation is down. It was 9% last year. It is 3% right now. So what exactly is happening? How is inflation falling without an economic contraction? Let me tell you what BlackRock is saying. It is the biggest investment firm in the world. It handles around $8 trillion in assets. BlackRock says this is all temporary. The US economy will remain stagnant throughout the rest of this year, neither expand nor contract. But next year, it could enter full employment stagnation. And what does that mean? Well, three things basically: weak economic growth, rising inflation, and shortage of labor. These three things could characterize the US economy next year. It's better than recession, but it also means no growth. Now, I must say this here. These are all different predictions. Each economist has something different to say about the US economy. Some business leaders are saying stagnation is great. Others say it's a disaster. Do you know why? Because we are in uncharted territory. Remember what we said about the Wuhan virus. how its long-term impacts cannot be predicted but only experienced. It's no different for the economy. The pandemic changed the structure of the global economy for the good or bad. Only time will tell. Our next story comes from Singapore, the fifth least corrupt country in the world, also one with the lowest crime rates in the world. Singapore is in news for a massive Hollywood-style police operation. Simultaneous raids were conducted across the country. This is among their biggest crackdowns on money laundering. 10 foreign nationals have been arrested, 30 are said to be involved. Police have seized gold bars, luxury homes, designer handbags, wine and bundles of cash. Some 90 homes and 50 cars. This is property worth almost 1 billion Singaporean dollars. That's about 740 million US dollars. Our next report has more details.
Singapore has a reputation. In an Asia that's usually rife with corruption, the tiny island nation stands out. Singapore prides itself on being tough on crime, on having a no-nonsense approach to corruption. But sometimes, criminals seem to forget that. Or they want to try their luck anyway. So they end up going to Singapore to enjoy the sights and sounds, and eventually catch the Singaporean police's attention. The result? Raids like the one on Tuesday. Singapore's police force says 400 officers conducted simultaneous raids across the island nation. Their target was a gang of foreign nationals, some 30 people with links to each other and organized crime abroad. On Tuesday, the Singaporean police raided luxury properties to nab these people. 10 were caught, 12 are now working with the police, and 8 are still on the run. The people who were caught are all between the ages of 31 and 44. The raids brought a massive haul. It included 94 properties. These were from some of the prime locations in Singapore. About 5 of the suspects were picked up from good-class bungalows. These are ultra-luxury properties that can cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and they can only be owned by Singaporean citizens. Remember, all those arrested were foreigners, so they shouldn't have been living in these properties in the first place. Then there were the cars. 50 vehicles were seized. The police released photos. Yes, it seems the criminals liked their Bentleys and Rolls Royces. The properties and cars alone were worth about 600 million US dollars. But that wasn't all. There was, of course, mountains of cash in various currencies. It was worth about $17 million. There were 2 gold bars in the hall as well, and 11 documents detailing virtual assets. But it wasn't all just investments for the criminal gang. They did splurge. About 120 electronic devices like mobile phones and computers were seized. Then there were luxury goods. Over 250 luxury watches and bags, enough to put most Asian showrooms to shame. There was also fine wine and drink, walls stacked with liquor. And then there was this. These are called bear bricks. They're collectible designer toys from Japan. Perhaps it was a hobby for one or more of the criminals. This entire haul is worth close to 1 billion Singaporean dollars. That's about 740 million USD. The Singaporean police say that all this wealth was from criminal activities conducted overseas, like scams and online gambling. The activities may have taken place in other countries, but the money from them was being laundered in Singapore. The 10 suspects have been arrested for forgery and money laundering. Since they've been charged, their details have been made public. 3 are Chinese nationals. Another 3 are Cambodian nationals. 2 had Cyprus passports. 1 was a Turkish national, and 1 had a passport from the Pacific island nation of Vanuatu. On the face of it, this seems like a diverse set of backgrounds, but that isn't the case. The Singaporean police says the foreign passports are believed to be issued by China. So at one time or the other, all 10 suspects may have been Chinese citizens. And later, some went on to collect passports of their choice. That's all we know so far. Remember, 8 suspects are still on the run. And the details of the 12 others who are cooperating with Singapore's authorities aren't public yet. We might get more information as this criminal web unravels. Till then, Singapore's police left criminals with this warning. Our message to these criminals is simple. If we catch you, we will arrest you. If we find your ill-gotten gains, we will seize them. We will deal with you to the fullest extent of our laws.
Now to the United States. It's the land of the free, but conditions apply. And that condition is gender. If you're a man, America is the place to be. You can flaunt your guns, spew hate on podcasts, even plot attacks on the US Capitol. But if you're a woman, tough luck. You can't even control your own body. The US government will do that for you. Let me tell you about a new court ruling. It will limit access to one particular abortion pill. This one, it's called Mifepristone. It's a very important medicine. It makes up more than 50% of all abortions in the US. Until now, it was easy to get. The pill could be shipped via mail. It could also be prescribed by medics who are not doctors. And the time frame was 10 weeks. Mifepristone could be taken up to week 10 of the pregnancy. But the new court ruling opposes this. No mail shipments, no telephone prescriptions, and no 10-week rule. The court says the pill must be taken within 7 weeks. There is a caveat though. The restrictions won't be imposed immediately. The US Supreme Court will be hearing this case soon. It is their decision that counts, and honestly, that's even worse. It's like betting on oil companies to reverse climate change. They are the problem. And what if the Supreme Court upholds this verdict? Then abortion pills will become even harder to get in the US. And I emphasize on the word even harder because 20 American states have effectively banned abortion already. This court case is all about taking it national, to destroy a woman's right to choose. What is President Joe Biden doing about this? He hasn't said anything so far, but expect a generic statement, something about defending the rights of women. And I know what most people will say, it's the court's decision, not Biden's. Yes, it is. But presidents are not powerless figureheads. Their words and actions are important, and Biden's words and actions do not inspire confidence. In June this year, he was addressing a campaign event. No cameras, though. It was only for donors. The White House later published a transcript of what he said, and listen to what he said. I happen to be a practicing Catholic. I'm not big on abortion. But guess what? Roe versus Wade got it right. This is what Biden said. Most people already knew this. Biden, the individual, is opposed to abortion. Biden, the president, supports it. But was it really necessary to say that? And that too in the middle of a national crisis on reproductive rights. Why should women trust Joe Biden after what he's been saying? Imagine him saying the same thing about climate change. I don't believe it's real, but I will fight it. How absurd would that be? My point is, the president is dragging his feet. He talks passionately about Ukraine. He rails about gun rights. But on abortion, he's half-hearted at best. Why? Because he's not big on it. This isn't just about one political party or one court. It's a collective failure of the United States. But who will criticize them? The world is handling America with kid gloves. I'll show you how. A 13-year-old girl recently gave birth in the US, 13. She lived in Mississippi. She was raped. Then she was denied abortion at the local clinic. A 13-year-old, let me repeat that, a child herself. She's just taken admission in class 7, and she has a baby. The world has said nothing about this. Now consider what happened in Peru. An 11-year-old girl was raped by her stepfather. She too was denied abortion at first, but then the United Nations intervened. They lobbied with the Peruvian government, and guess what happened? It worked. The state doctors authorized the abortion of the girl in Peru. Do you see the difference in attitude? Silence on America, intervention elsewhere. What they did with Peru must be applauded. It was the right thing to do. But their silence on the US must also be questioned. We can't keep dismissing this as America's domestic political issue. It is a human rights crisis. 25 million women cannot choose whether to have a child or not in America. How is this internal politics? And the same America then judges other countries. You may remember the anti-hijab protests in Iran last year. Do you know what Biden said then? We stand with the women of Iran. How wonderful. Maybe stand with the women of America too. The US has criticized most of the world on human rights. They have a special report just for it. For 5 decades, America has published the Human Rights Report. Every country gets a chapter, every country except the United States of America. We're not saying standing up for women elsewhere is wrong, or that Iran's women are better off than American women. We are saying, put your own house in order. You don't have control over the Ayatollah in Iran. You don't have control over the Taliban in Afghanistan, but you do have control over your own country. So fix what you can, then fix the world. In 2021, the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan. It was like the sequel no one asked for. But we were forced to watch it anyway. 2 years later, the Taliban are the rulers of Kabul. They face no opposition, and in a plot twist, they have now banned all political parties. They say it's against Islamic law. They say it doesn't support national interest. This is a masterclass in how to make an oppressive regime more palatable. Because why go through the inconvenience of democracy when you already have an authoritarian regime? The fact is, democracy has long been dead in Afghanistan. In 2021, they had some 70 political parties, but that changed when the Taliban came to power. They formed the government, they censored the opposition, and they cracked down hard on dissenters. So 2 years later, this diktat does not change anything. Why? Because there is no opposition to the Taliban rule. Sure, there were talks of resistance in 2021, but even that is dead right now. The so-called Afghan opposition is weak. More importantly, they're scattered across the globe. They have failed to mobilize support, and the world is not backing their campaign. So simply put, there is no opposition. No one is challenging the Taliban in Afghanistan, which brings us to the question, should the world start talking to them? I know it's a highly controversial question. It divides both Afghans and the rest of the world. Should we be talking to the Taliban? But this is a question you cannot avoid after 720 days. When the Taliban last came to power, 3 nations recognized them: Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. But this time, it's a no-show. No country has formally recognized their rule. But they can't simply ignore the Taliban. They are, after all, the rulers of Kabul. They've handled the economy. The security situation is relatively better. And even opium production is down. All of these are facts. What is also a fact is that one section of the society paid a price for this rule, and that is the women of Afghanistan. Their gains in the last 2 decades have been destroyed in just 2 years. They're stuck at home with no education, with no jobs, and without any prospects for their future.
I never turned back, nor did I ever give up. I continued on my path. Although there are no educational opportunities after the Taliban closed schools and universities, our minds can't be restricted. We can use our minds and fight against them.
I didn't think the Taliban could take over the country one day. But after they succeeded, their restrictions on women have increased day by day and caused us many problems. As far as I'm concerned, the victory day of the Taliban is the worst day for the people of Afghanistan.
Now, saying don't talk to the Taliban is easy. But what do you do if you don't talk? Boycott them again? Carpet bomb their country? Wage yet another war? Afghanistan has seen 40 years of war and suffering, 4 decades. Before 2021, 80% of the government's budget came from the international community. This has been cut off now. There are drought-like conditions. There are concerns over food security and restrictions on international banking. Plus, there is a deadlock. On one side, you have the West. They abandoned the Afghans and left billions of dollars of weapons with the Taliban. On the other side are the Taliban, busy painting a rosy picture and jetting off to meetings across the globe. Stuck in the middle are ordinary Afghans. They're going to bed hungry. Does the world not have a responsibility towards them? Is diplomacy the only option? Who starts it and where? These are all difficult questions, but that does not mean we brush them under the carpet. The West made a mess of this. They must push for solutions. If diplomacy is the only option, exercise it. That doesn't mean you have to roll out the red carpet for the Taliban. Engagement is not the same as recognition, but you have to start somewhere, and it's not like no one is talking to them. While the Taliban may be officially isolated, they appear to have enough interactions and engagements with the world. Many countries are cooperating with them on narcotics, on refugees, on counter-terrorism. Countries like China, Russia and Pakistan want an end to sanctions. They want to share in the natural wealth of Afghanistan, but no one wants to bother with the plight of the people who were bombed and abandoned. And now let's turn our attention to the Sudan, a resource-rich nation in North Africa, now on the brink of collapse. Two rival generals are fighting for control here. And the result is this: 4 months of devastating war, thousands of people dead, more than 1 million have fled the country. Those left are running out of food, medical supplies are scarce, looting, power and water cuts are rampant. Reports of sexual assault have increased by 50%. As the United Nations puts it, the situation is spiraling out of control. And what do the Sudanese officials say? This week they had a eureka moment. The deputy head of Sudan's Sovereign Council said, negotiations will end the war. A genius and equally obvious solution. Well, if things are that simple, why aren't negotiations already underway? What happens to the Sudan and its neighbors if talks do not happen soon? Our next report tells you.
There was a time when civilization was flourishing in Sudan, the North African nation. It has always been rich in resources, which is also one of the reasons behind its downfall. The power games that play out and destroy the nation a little more each day. This is what most of Sudan looks like now. Buildings and cars on fire, billows of smoke pouring out. Over 1 million people have fled the nation and gone to neighboring countries. They had to. Life in Sudan has been unsafe for a while now. And after 4 months of war, it has gotten worse.
Many of our family members are lost. We don't know if they are alive or dead. They kicked us out and we could not take anything with us. We were told that our houses were burned.
We've all been abused. There was rape and beating, and they killed children and young people. It's been going on for days and we've had no respite.
They took everything. They left us with nothing. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, they just kill everyone.
Those who could escape the country consider themselves lucky. At least 3 million people are displaced within Sudan. They are running out of food. They lack proper health care.
About 67% of hospitals in the affected areas are out of service. In these past 4 months, since the conflict began, WHO has verified 53 attacks on healthcare.
Cities like Khartoum, Darfur and Kordofan face rampant looting and long power, internet and water cuts. At least 4,000 people have been killed. Many of their remains have not even been identified, let alone collected or buried. Reports of sexual assaults are on the rise. They have risen by 50% since the war started. The people of Sudan face what can be called crimes against humanity on a daily basis.
Warn that the war is destroying people's lives and their homeland and violating their basic human rights. They call on the parties to the conflict to end the fighting, protect civilians, and give humanitarian organizations unfettered access to all people in need in all areas of Sudan. They remind the fighters that attacking civilians, looting humanitarian supplies, targeting aid workers and hospitals, or blocking aid, things we have seen throughout those 4 months, may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Yet, what solutions does the government offer? Barely any. This is Malik Agar, deputy head of Sudan's Sovereign Council. He says this war will end at the negotiating table. But where is this table? As of now, it's invisible. Reports say no negotiations are being held or planned. Numerous ceasefires between the warring army and rapid support forces have already been violated. The army and RSF continue to blame each other. This week, Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan accused RSF of taking the country back to an era before modernity. And RSF continues to accuse the army of trying to seize full power. Do these parties seem even remotely close to holding negotiations? By the looks of it, the rival generals will continue to battle at the cost of the Sudanese people and neighboring nations, which now bear the burden of millions of Sudanese refugees, while they grapple with their own economic woes. The war in Sudan has entered its 5th month. If the conflict continues, divisions will only deepen. Chances are it'll turn into a civil war, which will have ramifications beyond Sudan. It's time the warring factions look for their negotiating table, because no one else will build one for them.
Our next story is about the screen in front of you, at least some of you, the television. It has undergone so many changes in the last decades. We had the single channel era, we had the too many channels era, and now we could be heading to the no channel era. Let me explain. In the United States, cable TV is losing out. I have numbers for the last month. Cable and broadcast made up 49.6% of total viewership. This is the first time it has fallen below 50% in US history. People are moving away from cable TV. So what are they watching now? What are they watching on TV? Streaming content. The likes of Netflix and YouTube grew to 38.7%. It's a record high. And just to be clear, this trend has been visible for a long time. Streaming was slowly eating into cable and broadcast viewership. These numbers merely confirm that. And India's situation is no different. We had around 131 million cable connections in 2020. 131 million in India in 2020. It fell to 120 million last year, and by 2025, it could reach 116 million. What does it mean? It means that more and more Indians are giving up their cable connections. What are they watching instead? Streaming services. India was the fastest growing market for Netflix last year. Engagement was up 30%. Same with YouTube. We had 265 million users in 2019. It has increased to 574 million this year. YouTube. So more than double. This does not mean that television is dying. It only means that we consume on television, what we consume on television rather, is changing. Let's stay with India. The smart TV market grew by 28% last year. People rarely buy the old ones anymore. Around 93% of all TVs sold are smart, which means they can stream content. Your Netflix, your Amazon Prime, all of it can be accessed on smart TVs. What explains the shift? Well, we can think of 3 major reasons. Number 1, the nature of viewership. Streaming is on demand. You can pause it, play it, rewind it. And since most of us watch TV and multitask, we prefer streaming. With cable, that's not possible. If you multitask, you will miss out on the story. Reason number 2 is accessibility. Streaming can happen anywhere, on your phone, on your laptop, on your big screen TV, whatever you want. You don't have to be at home to watch something. You can do it on the go. And finally, reason number 3, the endless content. People can spend an eternity trying to just pick what to watch. Netflix, for example, has 17,000 shows and movies. 17,000. Amazon Prime has around 28,000. YouTube has more than 800 million videos. It's impossible to run out of content. Cable TV cannot offer you that, neither the scale nor the diversity of content. Does this mean streaming is here to stay? Well, the industry is not without problems. Most streaming giants are not making huge profits. Netflix made $4 billion last year, but their subscriber growth is problematic. They added 18 million new subscribers in 2021, but in 2022, just 9 million. So if subscriber growth slows down, how will streaming giants make money? By charging you more. Disney Plus is increasing prices by $3. Hulu is doing the same, and HBO Max has increased prices by $1. I'm talking about American prices here. Pretty soon, a cocktail of top streaming services could cost you up to $87. Last year, this was $73. So streaming costs are rising. But will that be enough to push customers back to cable television? Indications are it won't. Streaming giants are pumping billions into new content. They've created cult favorites. You associate certain shows with streaming, like Stranger Things with Netflix, or Game of Thrones with HBO. These companies have capitalized on this trend. It also helps that internet keeps getting cheaper. That's the big difference between cable and streaming. Cable does not need internet, streaming services do. There's no point trying to wait for streaming to fall apart. Instead, cable TV needs to reinvent itself. Why would I wait 1 week for a new episode when all of them are released together on Netflix? So the strategy needs to change for the advertisers too. If your viewers are tuning out of cable TV, where does it leave TV ratings and the ads that follow them? Think about it. For our last story tonight, let's go back to the year 1954. That's when the first human organ was transplanted successfully. It took surgeons 9 attempts, but at last they were successful. They transplanted a kidney. About 7 decades have passed since, and now doctors have achieved another feat of transplanting, again with a kidney, but this time they have put one from an animal inside a human. Now, usually human bodies reject an animal organ within minutes, but a pig kidney was transplanted into a brain-dead man in the US, and it continued to function for 32 days. This is a great advance. We'll tell you how. Also, why humans need animal organs in the first place. Here's a report.
100,000. That's the number of people on the transplant waiting list today the world over. 100,000 people. Every 9 minutes, another name is added to the list, and every day, 17 people die waiting for an organ. People die after waiting years for a transplant. Some become too sick to even receive one. Others never make the waiting list. The situation is dire. For years, science has been trying to find a solution, and since long, it's known what it could be. Xenotransplantation, the use of organs from a different species, usually animals. But science hadn't been too successful thus far. The organs failed soon after transplantation. In 2022, US surgeons transplanted a gene-edited pig heart into a dying man. He survived only 2 months before the organ failed. In 1964, another US surgeon had attempted transferring a chimpanzee's heart into the chest of a rapidly deteriorating 68-year-old man. He rejected the chimp heart. He died after 90 minutes. A series of disappointments. But doctors didn't give up on trying. Here's why. Pig kidney has been transplanted into a brain-dead man in the US. The kidney was genetically altered and it continued to function for 32 days. It didn't get rejected instantly. It's taking over the functions of a human kidney, like producing urine and filtering toxins. This is a huge feat for transplantation. It follows another case from this week, where another US brain-dead man received 2 pig kidneys. They continued to function for 7 days. These transplant surgeries have given hope to the world. In 2021, 144,000 people got their organs transplanted. 38% of them were kidney transplants. None of them came from animals, because animal kidneys are usually rejected in minutes after they're transplanted. And rejection is not just physical when it comes to animal organ transplants. The field is not free of controversy either.
It really is a very complex issue that needs to be looked at on many levels. But as an animal protection association, we of course find this ethically very questionable and not justifiable, because animals should not serve as spare part storage for humans.
The ethical concerns continue to be up for debate. But one thing is clear. Animal organs have the potential to do wonders for people across the world. It could be life-saving therapy. There are miles to go, and the science has only just begun.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Argentina. A bus unexpectedly caught fire on a highway in Buenos Aires. It led to panic among the passengers. The fire started spreading on the highway due to fuel spillage. In Tahiti, people picked up their surfboards for the Tahiti Pro Surf competition. And in a tribute to Indian superstar Rajinikanth, the Japanese ambassador to India danced to his new viral hit. You have to watch the video. And finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1947, the Radcliffe Line was revealed. India and Pakistan had become newly independent from the British rule. The Radcliffe Line divided them into 2 separate territories. This is a man who never visited India, by the way. He divided it. And this was followed by widespread communal violence. We're calling it a wrap. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
authority to intervene